In this lab, we're going to cover customizing and sharing workflows. As you will recall, the Teams in Space team have some requirements regarding the workflows. It's all a bit of a mess at the moment, and we're going to help fix that. In the first exercise, we'll look at editing an existing workflow. We'll add a condition, a validator, and also a post function. We'll create a workflow scheme which we can use in the development projects. And finally, we'll look at updating an agile board to use the workflow changes we made. In the second exercise, we'll look at the different methods of exporting and importing workflows. So let's start exercise 1. We need to be an admin for this, so I'm already logged in as Dakota. I want to look at the workflow for the Rocketeers app project. Here you can see the project uses the Dev Software Simplified Workflow scheme, and that it contains a single workflow called Software Simplified Workflow for Project Dev. Let's have a look at that workflow. Looking at this workflow, you can see it's a simple 3-status workflow with global all transitions. This all transition means that any issue in any status can transition to the status it is pointing at. These are great for processes where there are very few constraints on the path an issue can take through the workflow. It also doesn't make screens appear when users transition the issues. However, it's not very good if your process requires an issue to transition through its workflow in a more controlled or formal manner, where screens appear in certain transitions, allowing users to populate fields on the screens. I'm now going to show you what a project administrator can do compared to a Jira administrator. So I'm going to log out and log back in as Alana. I want to have a look at the Dev Agile board. Here you can see the column configuration. Because Alana is a project admin and also a board admin, she can add columns and statuses to the board because it's using the simplified workflow. However, she can only add existing statuses. She can't create new ones. If the workflow changed to a custom one, she would no longer be able to add statuses, but only columns. You only need to be a board admin to add columns. Remember that adding a column to a simplified workflow will add a new status matching that column. I'm going to log out and log back in as Dakota. Let's go look at the workflows again. I'm going to look at the Jira default workflow, which is inactive, so I need to scroll down to the bottom and expand that. You can see here this is a pretty simple workflow, and it's an ideal starting point for any new workflow you want to create. I prefer to copy an existing workflow when building new ones, as it's less work than building them from scratch. Going back to the workflows, as you can see again in the inactive section, there's a workflow called Dev Code Workflow. Let's edit that. I'm going to click on the Show Transitions label so I can see what the transitions are called. This differs to the default Jira workflow as someone has already added the in-code review status, removed the resolve status, and have also updated the transition names appropriately. OK, I'm going to add a condition to one of the transitions. Remember that the Teams in Space requirements state that only users in the development group should be able to transition an issue to the in-code review status. Let's change to text mode. Here you can see the code review transition, so I'm going to click on it. On this screen, you can see that the transition is available from 3 statuses: open, in progress, and reopened. It has no triggers, 1 condition, no validators, and 5 post functions. You can also see that the Resolve Issue screen will be displayed when the transition is triggered. Let's have a look at the condition. So here you can see that only users with the Resolve Issues permission can carry out this transition. I'm going to add another condition so that only members of the development group can carry out the transition. Click on Add Condition. Here you can see the list of conditions available. I'm going to use the user is in group condition. Click on Add. Select the development group. Click Add. Now you can see both conditions here. Normally I try to use project role membership conditions as it gives the project admins more control over who can do what in their projects. However, in this instance, because the requirements state that any developers should be able to transition the issue, I'm using the development group. Another requirement we need to satisfy is that the developers have to fill in the time spent field when transitioning an issue. So I'll select the Validators tab and click Add Validator. On this page you can see the available validators. I'm going to select the Fields Required validator and click Add. Note that this validator has JSU behind it. This is not one of the default Jira validators but is provided by a third-party app. There are lots of third-party apps that can provide more constraints, validators and post functions available in the Atlassian Marketplace. Search the Marketplace for apps that may provide the functionality you need. Anyway, back to the validator. I need to find the time spent field and click Add to move it into the required fields box. I'm also going to provide a helpful error message. I'm clicking Add. OK, you can now see the validator here. Finally, I want to add a post function to the transition, so click to the Post Function tab. Here you can see the default post functions for this transition. Note that you can't change these, but you can add new ones. Another requirement is that teams in Space want to know which developer worked on an issue when it goes for code review. So I'm going to click on Add Post Function. And here you see the list of available post functions. Because the assignee is normally the person working on the issue, which will most likely be the developer, I'm going to copy the assignee field to the developer field. I'm going to use the copy value from other field post function and click on Add. There are some parameters I need to set here. It needs to be in the same issue, so I'll leave the issue relation as the default within the same issue. Copy field is assignee. To field is the developer. And I want to overwrite any existing data. Click on Add. You can now see this post function at the top of the list. OK, that will do for the workflow changes. I now need to create a new workflow scheme. I'm doing this because I want to use both this modified dev code workflow and the Jira default workflow with different issue types in the same project. So let's get to workflow schemes. I'm going to create a new scheme. Click on Add Workflow Scheme. I'm going to call it Dev Workflow Scheme. And give it a description. And click Add. By default, the scheme will already contain the Jira default workflow, so I only need to add the dev code workflow. So click on Add Workflow, Add Existing, and find the appropriate workflow. There it is. So highlight that. You can see it on screen, so that's correct. So click Next. Now on this screen, we get to select which issue types should use our new workflow. Now at Teams in Space, the bug, feature request and story issue types go through the code review, so I'll select them and click Finish. Now here you can see that the Jira workflow will be used for any unassigned issue type, whilst the dev code workflow will be used for the issue types we've just selected. Now I need to associate this new scheme with the Rocketeers app project. So I need to navigate back to the project. As you can see here again, the project is currently using the Software Simplified Workflow for Project Dev. I'm going to switch the schemes. So click on Switch Scheme. So I need to select the new Dev Workflow scheme and click Associate. Now here Jira will check if any issues need to be migrated to the new workflows. However, as we've not created any issues yet, there are no issues to migrate. So click Associate. And now you can see the scheme has been associated and the workflows are correct. Now we've changed the project's workflows, we need to update the project's Agile board. Okay, we're in the board, let's configure it. In the columns. Now this column configuration looks different. We still have the same column names, but note we have warning icons on the to-do and done statuses. This means these statuses are no longer available in the project's workflows. Dragging these from the columns will make them disappear. We also have unmapped statuses on the right-hand side. Let's drag these to the correct columns. OK, so closed should move to the rightmost column, as that is always the last status in a workflow. Open, I'm going to move to the to-do column. And reopened, I'm going to put in progress column. You can have multiple statuses mapped to a column like this. So what am I going to do with the in code review status? Well, I'm going to add a new column and I'm going to call it in code review, so I can then drag the status to that column. I'm happy with that. Let's test it by creating an issue. So let's create a bug in the Rocketeers app. Okay, let's call it something. Give it a description. Leave everything else as it is. Click on Create. Okay, let's go back to the backlog view. Click on Back to Board. Now you can see the issue has been created in the backlog. I'm going to need to create a sprint and drag the issue into the sprint and start the sprint so I can see the issue on the board. So I'm going to click on Create Sprint. Drag the issue in and click Start Sprint. I'm just going to leave all the settings at their default values. Click on Start. OK, so I can now see the board and the issue is on it. I can see the 4 columns, so that's correct. I'm going to drag the card to the In Progress column. That's OK. Now let me try and drag it to the In Code Review column. I can't. Remember, we put a condition on the transition, so only users in a development group can trigger it. Well, Dakota is not a member of that group, so this behavior is correct. Let me log out and then log back in as a user who is a developer. So I'll log in with Max Taylor. Let's get back to the dev board. So I'll click on the issue number so I can assign the issue to myself, or Max's user in this case. So you can see the assignee is now Max. Now let me try and drag this issue into the In Code Review column. Yep, the transition screen appears, so the condition is working. However, remember we also put a validator on the transition. That means the developer has to enter a time spent value. Let's see what happens if I don't provide a value. Let's pick a resolution. Click Resolve. And here's the error message I provided earlier. Let's add a value in, and I'll leave the resolution as it is. Click Resolve. Let's have a closer look at that issue. Looking at the People section, you can now see that the developer field has been updated with Max as user. Let's move on to the next exercise. In this exercise, I'm going to quickly show you how you can share any workflows you've created. Jira allows you to export your workflows so you can use them in another instance. You can import them and even download them from the Atlassian Marketplace. Workflows can be exported as XML or workflow objects. We'll have a look at both here. I'll log out and log back in as Dakota. Let's go to the Workflows admin page. I'm going to use the workflow we just created, the dev code workflow, and export it as XML. So let's click on View for this one. Click Export and export as XML. Okay, let's have a look at this file. So you can see this is what a workflow looks like when it's exported as a XML document. You see various functions, transitions, etc. We won't go into much detail on this, I just wanted to show you. Now this XML file can be imported into another Jira instance, so let's do that. I need to be a Jira Systems Administrator to do that, not just a Jira Administrator, so I need to log out and log back in as Mitch with M. Davis. Now let's get back to the workflow admin pages. And let's import this file. Click Import, Import XML. Now there are two ways of getting this XML file into Jira. You can either paste its content into the dialog window, or you can place the XML file on the Jira server and give it the path there. So first I'm going to give it a name. Let's call it select paste, go back to the XML document, select all, copy, paste that in there, and click import. We can now go and look at this imported workflow in the list of inactive workflows. And there you can see it there. Let's check some of the configurations. We're in text mode. Let's have a look at the code review transition again. Just looking at the conditions, and they both look okay. The validator and the post functions. So everything looks okay. Note that for the workflow to work correctly on the system the workflow is being imported into, that instance of Jira must have any apps that provide extended workflow configuration installed. As we're importing into the same instance, it's not an issue here. Now let's export as a workflow. Let's go back to the workflows. Find the dev code one again. Now this time I'm going to export it and use as workflow. Now this process is a lot different to the XML export. So here you can see what you can do with this workflow export. So for instance, you can import it into another Jira instance, or you can share it on the Atlassian Marketplace. Let's click on Next. You can see on this page that Jira has helpfully auto-generated some notes about what it's done. As you can see, it's discarded parts of the workflows provided by apps, such as transitions, validators, and so on. You can also add your own notes. For example, you could document the conditions and other configuration items the export process has removed, which apps are required to be installed in the target system, and so on. OK, click on Export. OK, so that's downloaded the file. Let's import this workflow. Click on Import and Import Workflow. So here we can upload the workflow object directly, so we don't have to put it on the server. You can also download workflows from the Atlassian Marketplace. So I'm going to select from my computer, find the file. There it is, JWB. Click on that. Click on Next. Now here you can see Jira has already selected a name. It's almost the same as the original, but only the D in the dev is uppercase, whilst the original dev was all uppercase. Let me change that to see what happens. Click on Next. And it gives me a warning as a workflow with the same name already exists. So I'll change the name. Let's call it and click Next. Now on this screen, I have to map the statuses in the workflow file to statuses in Jira. We're OK here as the source and target systems are the same. But if you were importing into another Jira instance, you could map these to existing statuses or create new ones. I'm OK with this, so I'm going to click on Next. And here we can see a preview of the import. You can see it's telling me that it's going to create a new screen. OK, I'm happy with this, so I'm going to import it. So it tells us what's been done, provides us the notes again, and click on Done. Here it is. Let's edit it. Now let's look at that code review transition again. OK, so here you can see that the conditions, validators, and post functions we added are no longer there. On this instance, these configuration items will need to be created again for this workflow. And if this was another Jira instance, the app that provides the functionality would need to be installed and the configuration items again recreated. So that's it for this lab. Let's go back to the course.